Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And we are back today, joined live on the Zoom and on the podcast here with Monica Garnett, and she's helping so many here in Los Angeles, California, but she's also licensed in Illinois, Nevada, New Jersey, and
Virginia.
Virginia. That's the other one. I always forget because it's not on my sheet. But yeah, she's a therapist. It's garnettcounseling.com. And we're going to talk today about all the care that she provides. And don't forget, she also can work with you with substance abuse as well. And that's everywhere, right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So tell us a little bit about what you do before we begin today's show.
Okay. Just kind of piggybacking. So in all of those areas, specifically, we provide individual care. I can't speak this morning. Individual therapy, couples counseling, and family, as well as life coaching. But life coaching and substance abuse is everywhere. So
All right.
we are here to work with everyone.
Great. And the work you do, by the way, give me some examples of the type of, things that people come to you for. Was it life coaching? Is it relationships? Is it anxiety?
Oh, right now it seems to be anxiety is, I would say if it's not number one, it's a close two.
Okay.
It's at the top. And then of course those lovely relationships.
Yes,
So
yes, we talked a lot about those. Yeah, for sure. And communication in general, which I think is today's topic, right?
absolutely.
Communication you
Yes.
want to talk about, which you say is discussed a lot. So let's start with that.
Yes.
And the purpose of, hey, what is communication? Let's start with like the basic.
Well, communication really is just it's just how do we share information,
hmm
and the reasons why we're sharing it. Are we letting someone know what our feelings are, providing information, details, instructions. Communication is that excuse me, it's the process between one or two people that or excuse me, not one or two, but two or more people in which they go through that as far as, how do I share this information and how do I receive it?
hmm
And sometimes I was just thinking when I said two or three people, I was also thinking about how many times do we talk to ourselves as well.
Yeah, right. It's so
Yeah,
true.
yeah. But it's an interaction, and sometimes it could be transactional.
hmm
So yeah. And so yeah, the main purpose is just sharing that information. And how do
hmm
I do it? And I
Perfect.
thought it was going to be a perfect this is a perfect um process. I can't speak this morning. Good gracious.
That's okay.
Um because we had spoke before about boundaries, especially emotional boundaries. And I remember one of the questions you had asked was, what if someone is not understanding? And I was like, oh, you know what?
Wow.
That is so true,
hmm
because sometimes we can share, but the other person is not receiving, or
hmm
vice versa. The other person is sharing. And it makes me I laugh because I think back to my dad. My dad would talk. He was a communicator. And I would just kind of glaze over. So of course I wasn't receiving that information,
Of course.
so the information that process, it wasn't complete. And so there's two parts of communication that I wanted to talk about too, which is verbal and nonverbal.
hmm
And so we're so used to our words, the verbal, because it's what we hear, it's what we say.
hmm
And sometimes when we feel as though we're not being heard or the other person is not receiving, our verbal, it may become louder. We may become frustrated in ourselves. There's so many different things, but then the nonverbal can actually back up what the verbal is, and vice versa.
Okay.
And so if we have someone who's saying, well, you don't seem like you're understanding, and the person's saying, well, I'm giving you eye contact,
hmm Yeah.
here you go, then we know that, okay, well, maybe it's not just what they seem to be hearing, based upon their verbalizations, but what they're receiving through nonverbal. And one of the things that I like to look at too, because I'm just going to jump a little bit, because they can go hand in hand.
Okay.
And so I'm jumping a little bit further where I talked about what are some of the barriers. And sometimes there's a miscommunication in verbal and nonverbal. And this is my favorite because I think there's so many people do it and they don't recognize it. When they say, yes, I don't think so. And or yes, I do think so. And they're shaking their
Yep.
head no, but they're saying yes. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a mismatch between the verbal and nonverbal. And it's just like, wait, what are you saying? Are you getting it or are you not getting it? What's going on
Or are
here?
you saying something that you're different than you're feeling? But okay.
Exactly, exactly. And so, but I'm just using that as an example to just show how they can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I think nonverbal is, it's a little slept on, just a little bit, because people don't realize how important it is. You know, going back to how do I know that person is receiving me?
Mm-hmm.
Or how am I conveying the message? You know, what is my facial expression saying? Do I have a poker face? You know, am I saying one thing or showing what I'm thinking on the inside? And so that's actually another favorite of mine when I see someone and I say, oh, you're thinking something that you're thinking differently than you're feeling. And they're like, oh, you caught me.
How do you know? Yeah.
Exactly.
It's written all over your face, your nonverbal expressions.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because even though we think we're not communicating, we are communicating. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Even body language,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, it was some people have a tendency to cross their arms. I'm crossing my arms. You may not be able to see me.
Yeah, I could see it though. Thanks for stretching. Mm-hmm.
And for some, you know, that communicates, I'm shutting off. And so we can have a conversation, you know, an in-depth conversation. And if I feel like if I see the other person cross their arms, you know, what information is that person receiving? And what is that? And what information is that other person providing? Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just being aware of not just what we say, but what we do, how we
Mm-hmm.
communicate that as well, you know. Uh, and so actually I have it all in here, gestures,
Gestures.
body language. You know, the gestures, I have a tendency to talk with my hands, which I'm doing
So
pretty
do I.
well, really.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You know, it wasn't until COVID that I realized, oh wow, you really talk with your hands a lot. Because I would look at the
Working in
screen.
television all the years, I'm like this and I talk like this. And then when you watch yourself, you're like, that's so annoying.
Yes.
I mean, unless I'm doing the weather and I have to use my hands for weather, traffic, you pointing
Yes.
to maps, different. But then when I feel like I was anchoring, I'd be like moving my hands and I'm like, okay, no, not supposed to be moving your hands, Jill.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it makes you aware.
Hmm.
Seeing yourself on the screen, it really does make you aware of how you're looking or how you may be looking to others.
Hmm.
But it goes back to that nonverbal. And so just kind of skipping up a little bit, what are the benefits of communication? You know, the first thing that I think of is validation. You know, sometimes I think that's the
One wants to be
catchphrase.
heard. Yes, yes, yes.
Everyone wants to be heard,
Yeah,
you
true.
know.
Hmm.
And so sometimes there's a mix up where, well, the person is not understanding what I'm saying, so they're not validating me,
Hmm.
you know. And so but the validation, it doesn't have to be we agree. It's I'm being heard,
Yeah.
you know. And so there's some things that do get in the way of that. And one is emotional barriers. You know, there's I've heard some people say, and I so agree with it, where, you know, there's a time and a place for things. Same thing with communication. You know, if I'm talking to my partner about a sensitive subject, I may not want to talk to that person when they are feeling low, when they're sad, when they're frustrated at work,
Hmm.
you know, whatever is going in their life, or even when they're sick, you know. I mean, I want to prepare the stage or set it. And so that could be, excuse me, excuse me, that could be waiting until a better time. I call it softening the stage. It's my own little thing. But I like to say, you know what? Can we talk?
Mhm.
And that goes for colleagues, that goes for family members and relationships. I have something to share. It's nothing big, but can I tell you what I'm thinking? And then that gives that, I call it the invitation as well. And that gives that person a chance to say, not right now. It's
Mhm.
not a good time, you know. Or, oh gosh, what do you want to talk about now? And then if I receive that response, then I can say, well, is this really a good time just based upon their response to my invitation?
Mhm.
And if it is, then I may go ahead and say, okay, we can talk now or schedule a time where we can talk, you know. And so, excuse me. Then another thing is distractions. And so we're still setting the stage, for the conversation or whatever I want to communicate, because it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out conversation. And so, what distractions are going on? What's happening? How much information will the other person hear if I decide to say something while we're walking and there's construction everywhere? You know, that changes the mood. It also changes the information we can hear.
Mhm.
So what do I want to do? What do I need to add to set this stage? You know, um, and then personal biases and beliefs, because they can come in a lot too. And I'll throw in experiences. My experience tells me that this person may not hear
Mhm.
because they're tall. I don't know. I'm just making up things.
Mhm. I got you.
Yeah. And so even with that, just recognizing what are the other person where the other person may be coming from
Mhm.
and my communication. Doesn't mean for me to stop saying what I need to say or what I would like to say. But how do I communicate this? And I think this goes, it's really helpful to look at it, especially working with trauma patients or trauma clients, because there are certain things that there are certain things I would say with one particular group of clients than someone who's gone through a traumatic experience. I may change it up, or find the right time to say it. Whereas with someone with just anxiety, and I say that because sometimes PTSD does have anxiety features. Um, if someone with just anxiety, I may say something earlier on in their treatment or their therapy, where with PTSD or trauma clients, after working some of the steps and the processes, then I may communicate that. So it's really knowing where your audience is,
Mhm.
you know. And so those are a few things that can get in the way, but to also just be aware of. I call them barriers, but they're actually can be tools as well, if we change them around. And so healthy communication. I love that.
Yep.
How do we have it? How do we communicate to those who really don't want to listen
Mhm.
or don't seem to receive? And sometimes it's communicating and saying what you need to say, but recognizing that it's okay if that person doesn't receive it,
Mhm.
you know, because and I like to tell my clients a lot, is that personal? Do you think that was personal, or was that based upon their own beliefs or their own situation? And we could sit there and we could think about, you know what? It wasn't
Mm.
personal.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's not. And so I always say, don't let what it feels like stop you from engaging in healthy communication. And so one of the things is staying in the eye,
What's that?
you know. Well, the staying in the eye, especially when emotions rise, I feel as though, I feel as though you hurt my feelings. So versus you hurt my feelings. The saying that we're told as kids and even as adults,
True.
when you have one finger pointing out, you have three pointing back at you.
Mm-hmm. True.
And I remember being a kid and thinking, oh my gosh, here we go again. Here they're going to say that again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so true. And so when I go and I speak to someone and I say, you did this or you made me feel, I don't necessarily have to point my finger to say you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's implied by just the you and it feels different versus, I felt, I feel like you didn't hear me. I feel like you hurt my feelings or my feelings are hurt, and so it's less accusatory. So it kind of takes that sting off a little bit.
Just a little.
Just a little.
Sometimes, yes.
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sometimes. But it helps to start off on a different footing.
Mm-hmm.
And then also prepare. I personally am a preparer. I love to prepare, whether it's doctor's visits. I have a list of questions that I want to ask. At work, I have a list of questions I may want to ask the clients. And even in personal life, when I have maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be a detailed list, but just some notes, a few notes that I can go back to so I can be able to communicate all the things that I need to communicate. Because I think about it, how many times have we had a conversation and then walked away and said, I should have said this,
All the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I only thought about saying that, it would have been like not that it really would change the outcome, but you think so. It's like, yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the person may not hear, but it goes back to that validation and being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. So those notes, they are so great and they come in handy. And that's just to say, these are just suggestions. Everyone has their own way. And some people find their way because what works for some may not work for everyone. Another one that I like is keeping it factual, especially when emotions rise.
Mm-hmm.
Because emotions, they can come and go. But the facts stand.
True.
So when I feel myself, the emotions rising, there I go using my hands.
I see.
What are the facts?
No.
What's the truth? Sometimes the truth could be, well, I feel like you're not hearing me, or I feel like I've been disrespectful, or I feel like I'm well loved.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm appreciated. That could be factual. But then I go a little bit deeper when I look at the facts. Why do I feel that way? What are the things that are communicating to me the reasons why I'm in this place or I see it this way? And then another one is be concise. Gosh, it's funny, that concise one. I wish I can go back in time and just say, Daddy, be concise.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it short. Because sometimes when we have so much to say, it can feel like it's all coming at the other person at the same time. Again, we want to communicate so it's received. And so meeting that person kind of where they are, at the same time communicating what you need to. And so being concise, keeping it at a nice, talking with my hands again, nice box.
Okay.
And then another one is take breaks. It's okay to say, you know what, this is a little heated, or you know what, this conversation is taking a little longer than what I thought. Can we come back to it? Usually I say, if you're going to take a break, Give it a time limit. It's okay. When can we come back to it? Of course, we don't want to come back to it in a week.
Mm-hmm.
We want to come back to it in a good amount of time where we still can address everything that we have on the table. And that makes me actually think of working in the office when the supervisor says, nope, we're going to come back to this. Let's put a pin in it. We're going to come back to it. It kind of leaves the person hanging. So yeah, we could take a break. Let's take a break. Let's take a 5-minute break.
No,
Let's take an hour break.
Mm-hmm.
You said, say that again?
Nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all. Versus, yeah, well, I'll get back to you. No, we're not getting back. We're communicating. We're sharing this information. And then ask questions. You can ask, the person can ask, what did you hear when I said A, B, and C? How do you feel about what I just said? What are your thoughts about what I just said? It's okay if you agree with me or you don't agree with me, but I want your feedback. And I was just thinking about a scenario when I was talking to a person was telling me about how they would communicate with their parents, and they would just talk and talk and talk and talk. And they said they were so happy that neither parent had asked them, what do you think about what I said? Because they had no idea. Because one, it lasted so long. And then if they had asked the question, they would just see that, yeah, they weren't following along. And so we're talking about giving information, but not the receiving part. So then for the receiving, listen to hear. Sometimes I think, excuse me, sometimes and again, this is my opinion, but I think that we can be so caught up in, okay, you said this, but I need to say, I need to tell you, I need to share. But in doing that, there's so many things that we miss out on from that other person. And of course, we can have our turn too, our time as well. And so the listening to hear, it could go into active listening, eye contact, body gestures. But also there's a few skills that that I introduce. And I usually keep it pretty minimal, especially for those who are learning to hear and learning to listen. And one is reflection. If and I'll just use an example. A coworker can say, oh, I had a really hard time last night. And so the person who's listening can say, oh, you really had a hard time last night? Sometimes you change the tone of your voice. It kind of sounds like a question after, but it lets the other person know that, you know what, you're engaged and you're hearing, you're ready to hear. I've had some people say, oh my gosh, you want me to just repeat what the other person is saying? And I said, just give it a chance, see how it feels. At the beginning, it may not feel comfortable because a lot of times we don't employ these. But try and get out.
Yeah.
I like to practice on my sister. She doesn't know it, but now she may know it.
I love it. You got to do what you got to do. And we have a minute and a half left. My goodness, I'm sorry. We're out of
Oh,
time, Monica.
wow.
Yes.
Oh.
How can we reach you?
You can reach me at Garnett Counseling, GarnettCounseling.com and 888-427-6006. Facebook, it is Garnett Counseling, and Instagram is Garnett_counseling.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Looking
You're
forward
welcome.
to, speaking with you again. And for next week, I guess we're on, right?
Absolutely.
All
I'll
right,
be
good.
here.
One more time. And how do you spell Garnet? Just remind them the correct spelling of the website.
Garnett.
Perfect. Thank you again. Have a great day. Great
Thank
conversation
you.
on communication. Enjoy your
Absolutely.
beautiful day.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.